It was the wedding everyone whispered about, a stunning oceanfront ceremony where billionaires, royalty, and Hollywood stars watched in awe as Declan Thorne married the quiet woman who stole his heart. Eloise wore a gown like something from a dream, lace flowing behind her, hair pinned in soft curls, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Declan had built empires, negotiated global mergers, and bought entire islands, but nothing had ever felt as sacred as saying "I do" to her. She whispered the vows back, voice trembling just slightly, hand gripping his tighter than expected. Everyone called it the perfect match: beauty and power, heart and legacy. But even on the happiest day of her life, Eloise couldn't shake the memory of what she'd left behind. Declan kissed her like they were beginning a forever, but something in her soul still hadn't caught up, and only the honeymoon would reveal just how deeply she was still tied to something she couldn't let go. Declan flew them to an exclusive villa on a hidden Grecian island, the kind of place only billionaires could find on maps that didn't exist. The water was sapphire blue, the sky blazed golden, and their private staff bowed to Eloise like she was royalty. "I wanted this to feel like your own world," Declan told her, arms wrapped around her waist as they stood on the cliffside balcony. She smiled and leaned into him, but there was something in her silence, like her heart had boarded a different flight. That night, he brought her breakfast in bed and kissed her wrist like it was the first time. "You're everything to me now," he whispered. But as she held his gaze, her eyes shimmered in, not from joy. Declan didn't know what it was yet, but he felt it. Her body was with him, but her spirit was still somewhere else. On their third night, Declan woke to find Eloise gone from the bed, her pillow still warm. He stepped out onto the moonlit balcony and spotted her down by the edge of the cliffs, wrapped in a white robe, barefoot, holding something close to her chest. "Eloise," he called gently. She turned quickly, hiding the object in her sleeve. Before offering a soft smile, "Couldn't sleep," she said. "The sea calms me." He didn't press her, only kissed her forehead and walked her back. But as they lay in bed, Declan couldn't stop thinking about what she held, and why she felt she couldn't share it. Their villa had an antique desk, and Eloise asked that it not be touched. "Just for my journal," she'd said sweetly. But one afternoon while she was out walking, Declan heard a soft click from the drawer, as if something had shifted inside. Curiosity tugged at him like a whisper, but he resisted. She deserves her privacy, he told himself. And yet, when she returned, she checked the drawer immediately, as if afraid. That night, she clung to him tighter than ever before. But intimacy built on secrets always trembles like glass, and Declan was starting to feel the cracks. The next morning, Declan found her crying quietly in the shower, her phone still buzzing on the sink. When he picked it up, the screen flashed a name, no caller ID. He handed it to her without a word, and she froze. "Just spam," she muttered, wrapping herself in a towel, eyes avoiding his. But her hands trembled. Declan didn't ask again, but something in him shifted. He had never needed to spy on someone before, but now he was afraid not to. Because whatever this was, it had followed her into their honeymoon, and it was unraveling the fairy tale thread by thread. While unpacking his shaving kit, Declan accidentally knocked over the mirror, and behind it, a folded photo slipped to the floor. It was worn, edges soft, a bit crumpled, but the image was clear: Eloise holding hands with a man at a lakeside cabin, both smiling, completely in love. Declan's chest tightened, not from jealousy, but from the realization that she had lived an entire emotional life she'd never told him about. She returned moments later and saw the photo in his hand. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back. "That was a long time ago," she whispered. But Declan already knew. Her heart had never fully let go of that man. And now, he wasn't sure it ever would. That night, Declan didn't ask gently. He asked directly, "Who is he?" Eloise hesitated, sitting slowly, the ocean breeze tangling her hair. "His name was Simon," she said. "He died 5 years ago." Declan's heart sank. "You were in love?" She nodded, barely able to look at him. "We were engaged." Silence wrapped around them like fog. "And you never told me?" he asked. "Because I wanted to move forward," she said. "But I didn't know the past would follow me here." Declan didn't walk away, but something inside him broke. The first time in their relationship, Declan didn't know what to say. He walked the beach alone that evening, waves crashing against his thoughts. He had promised to love all of her, but how could he compete with a ghost? He couldn't offer closure, couldn't erase that part of her, and yet, hadn't he asked for her whole heart? Maybe he just didn't realize it came with scars. When he returned, Eloise was asleep, her hands still curled toward the space where he'd usually lay, and he realized, if he wanted her completely, he would have to be strong enough to hold her broken pieces too. The next morning, Eloise offered him the drawer key and placed a small wooden box in his lap. "You deserve to know," she whispered. Inside were photos, love letters, a necklace shaped like a compass hand, a final note from Simon before his car accident. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. But I hope you'll find a new life. Someone who makes you feel safe again." Declan stared at it for a long time. "You kept this all these years?" She nodded, trembling. "I didn't want to forget, but I never meant to hurt you." And for the first time, Declan saw her not as a bride but as a woman still healing. That evening, Declan recorded a quiet message for his followers who had been asking about their honeymoon. I married a woman I love, then she carries it. Past that deserves grace, he said. So if you're watching this, and you've ever loved someone who wasn't fully whole, remember, we don't marry perfection, we choose someone worth standing beside as they heal. Eloise joined him, hand in his. And if this story has touched you, subscribe to this channel, she said softly. Because real love stories aren't perfect, they're honest. Their eyes met. And for the first time since the wedding, the fairy tale felt real. Declan couldn't stop looking at the necklace's small silver compass, worn and bent slightly at the tip. He gave it to me before our last trip together, Eloise explained, voice soft like memory. He said, so you always find your way back. Declan traced it with his thumb, then slowly handed it back. Do you still need to? He asked. She shook her head. I used to, but not anymore. And though he wanted to believe her, something inside whispered that part of her was still lost in a place only Simon could reach. Declan didn't want to be a replacement, he wanted to be her beginning. It wasn't dramatic, no yelling, no storming off. It was the kind of argument that grows quietly, like tension in the air before lightning. Declan asked why she never brought Simon up during their engagement, and Eloise replied, because I didn't want to be seen as damaged. He flinched, hurt. I never thought that of you. She looked away, but I did. For the first time, they sat on opposite ends of the villa without touching, and the fairy tale marriage felt like glass already cracked, just waiting for pressure to shatter it. Declan packed a small bag just enough to leave for a night, maybe two. He wasn't angry, just emotionally exhausted. But when he reached the door, he heard Eloise sobbing raw, breathless, like something deep had broken. He paused, bag in hand, torn between pride and pain. Then he dropped it. He walked into the room and wrapped her in his arms without saying a word. Sometimes love means staying, especially when it's the hardest thing to do. And that night, they didn't fix everything, but they stayed. The next day, Eloise showed him a crumpled letter she had written, but never mailed to Simon's mother. I've carried guilt, she confessed. Not just for losing him, but for trying to move. The letter was raw, emotional, and unfinished. Declan read it slowly, absorbing the heartbreak she had carried alone. Then he handed it back. I think you should finish it, he said. Not for closure, but so you can stop asking yourself for permission to be happy. And she cried, not because it hurt, but because someone had finally told her she was allowed to heal. They walked the shoreline that evening, hand in hand, their silence soft instead of strained. I told the sea about him before I ever told you, she said. It's the only place I didn't feel judged. Declan kissed her knuckles gently. Then I'll take you to the sea every day if that's what you need. Eloise smiled through tears. No, she whispered. I just need you to not walk away when I'm still grieving. He nodded. I'll never leave you behind. The tide touched their toes and something inside both of them let go. Back home, they made an unplanned stop. Eloise asked to visit Simon's grave, and Declan said nothing, he just drove. She stood there for minutes that felt like hours, hand trembling, lips moving silently. Then she spoke out loud. I'm not forgetting you, she said to the stone, but I'm finally letting go of the guilt. Declan stood behind her but didn't interrupt. When she turned around, her eyes were swollen but lighter, and in that moment, she finally stopped running. Later that week, Eloise left her journal open on the bed by mistake. Declan saw the title of a page. If I ever truly let Simon go, his heart stopped. But he read only one line before closing. It then maybe I'll finally believe I deserve happiness, too. He didn't mention it. Instead, he made her tea, kissed her forehead, and simply said, you deserve everything that's coming, especially the joy. And for the first time in days, she laughed. It was small, but real, and it sounded like music. Declan and Eloise filmed a short video for the community that had supported their wedding livestream. Marriage isn't a finish line, Declan said. It's a beginning, and sometimes it begins with learning to understand each other's pain. Eloise held his hand and added, if you're still healing from something, it doesn't mean you can't be loved. It just means the right person will help you carry it. If this story has moved you, subscribe to the channel and leave your thoughts in the comments. You never know who might need your words. Love isn't perfect, it's patient. Eloise confessed that during their hardest night, she'd taken off her ring and placed it in a drawer. I wasn't sure I deserved to wear it, she admitted. Declan reached for her hand and slowly placed the ring back on her finger. This ring doesn't mean perfect love, he said. It means chosen love. Every day. She stared at it like she was seeing it for the first time. Then I'll keep choosing you, she whispered, even when I feel unworthy. And Declan kissed her because loving her wasn't hard. Letting her love herself was. They returned to the island 1 month later, not to escape, but to begin again. No secrets, no shadows, just the woman who was no longer hiding, and the man who waited for her to come home to herself. They laughed more this time, swam together, watched sunsets, without that heavy silence between them. This feels like the real honeymoon, Eloise said, curled up against him. Because now, I'm not pretending. Declan smiled, brushing hair from her face, and I'm not guessing. Love didn't always start at the altar. Sometimes it began when the pain was finally shared. Back at their estate, Eloise wandered into a sunlit room at the end of the hall she'd always avoided. It was filled with memories of Declan's late sister, a subject he rarely discussed. As she ran her hand over the bookshelves, she found a music box that played a lullaby. Declan entered moments later, surprised. "You kept this room sealed," she said. He nodded slowly. "Grief has a way of making even beautiful things unbearable." Eloise reached for his hand. "Then maybe it's time we open the doors together." For the first time, Declan let her in, not just to the room, but to the pain he'd buried. One night, a thunderstorm rolled across their estate, and Eloise sat up in bed, shaking, memories from Simon's accident flashing like lightning in her mind. Declan woke and wrapped himself around her protectively. "You're safe," he whispered. "You're here, with me." She clutched his shirt, barely able to breathe. "It still lives in my body," she said, "even after all this time." Declan stroked her hair gently. "Then we'll face every storm together until it passes, or until you learn to dance in the rain." And somehow, she believed him. Weeks later, a letter arrived from Simon's mother, written in response to the one Eloise had finally sent. She read it in silence, tears trailing down her face. "He loved you more than anything," the letter said, "but he wouldn't want you frozen in his memory. He would want you to live." Eloise handed the letter to Declan. "It feels like permission I didn't know I needed," she whispered. Declan smiled softly. "You've always had permission. You just needed to forgive yourself." And that night, she finally did. They traveled to the cabin. From the old photo, the last place Eloise had been truly happy, before Simon's death. "Are you sure?" Declan asked gently. She nodded. "I need to walk through it." As the woman I am now inside, everything was dusty, still, unchanged. But she wasn't. She stood by the window, touched the old chair, and whispered, "Thank you for loving me. But I'm ready now to love again, fully." When she stepped outside, Declan wrapped his arm around her. She didn't cry. She just smiled. And it was the purest smile he'd ever seen. Back home, Declan surprised her with a converted studio with space where she could write, paint, or just be. "I want you to create new memories here," he said. Eloise ran her fingers across the desk, then hugged him tightly. "You've given me so much space, and I think I'm finally ready to fill it." That night, she began writing again for the first time in years. Not about the past, but about possibility. And each word felt like a tiny piece of her returning home. They decided to celebrate their 6-month anniversary, not with luxury, but with honesty. Eloise shared a heartfelt post on Declan's channel, telling part of her story. "This isn't just a love story," she said. "It's about healing, and the people who stay even when you're not easy to love." Comments flooded in, stories from others who had loved through grief, through trauma, through time. Declan watched the numbers grow, but all he cared about was her. "You're helping people," he whispered, "by being real." And for the first time, she felt proud not of being perfect, but of surviving. Declan had a garden built in the back corner of the estate, wildflowers, a bench, and a stone with Simon's name carved quietly into the earth. "Not a grave," he said, "but a thank you." Eloise stood silently before it, moved beyond words. "You did this for him?" she asked. "No," Declan said. "I did this for you, for the part of you that still needed to say goodbye in beauty." She sat on the bench and took his hand, and they stayed there, surrounded by silence. Until the sun set behind them both. Eloise received a call from a women's support center, asking her to speak about grief, trauma, and learning to love again. "I'm not qualified," she said. At first, Declan tilted her chin up. "You lived it. You earned your voice." She agreed, nervous but determined. When she took the stage, she didn't speak like a widow or a billionaire's wife. She spoke like a survivor. The applause was quiet, respectful, and deeply real. And when she stepped off stage, Declan kissed her in front of everyone. "You've never been more beautiful," he said. Declan uploaded a personal message. "This story wasn't what we expected, but real love rarely is. If you're still watching, if this journey touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share." It was someone healing from something deep. Eloise joined him on screen, holding his hand. "Love doesn't erase pain," she said softly, "but it gives you something to hold on to when the pain feels bigger than you. And that, to me, is real magic." Their followers left thousands of comments, hearts, tears, gratitude, and one said simply, "You gave me hope again." For the first time in months, Eloise slept the entire night without waking in tears or memories. Declan woke to find her curled gently against him, breathing steady, hand resting on his chest. He didn't move, he just watched her, because in that moment he realized something. He hadn't fallen in love with a fantasy bride. He had married a woman who was real, complex, scarred, but full of light, and as the morning light spilled into the room, he knew he'd do it all again, 1,000 times over. One morning, while Declan helped Eloise unpack her winter sweaters, his eyes landed on a tiny tattoo near her ribs, just a small feather with a date. "You never told me about this," he said softly. Eloise placed her hand over it gently. "It was the day I promised myself I'd survive." Declan kissed the ink, slowly. "You didn't just survive," he whispered. "You created beauty from what nearly broke you." She smiled. "And you waited while I became someone who could love again." In that moment, They didn't just belong to each other, they belonged to something deeper. Declan bought a small countryside estate as a surprise, one Eloise had once pointed out in passing. It had ivy crawling up the stone, wildflowers in the field, and no press, no noise, just peace. "We can call it Ivy Hill," he said, "not to escape, but to grow something new." Eloise walked the rooms in awe, her fingers touching the walls like memory. "I never imagined a life like this," she whispered. Declan wrapped his arms around her. "That's because you were always busy imagining how to survive. Now you get to imagine how to live." On their first night in Ivy Hill, Declan surprised Eloise with a second proposal. No cameras, no diamond, just a wooden ring. He carved himself. "I want to marry you again," he said, kneeling on the kitchen floor. "Not for the world to see, but because this time, I know your whole heart." Eloise couldn't speak through the tears. She simply nodded and kissed him, and when she placed the wooden ring beside the diamond one, it felt like her past and present had finally stopped fighting. Eloise began painting again, not for galleries or shows, but for herself. Her first canvas was a portrait of a woman with one foot in the sea and one on the sand, arms open to the wind. Declan stood behind her, speechless. "That's you," he said. "That's us," she corrected, "because you waited at the shore while I found the courage to return." She titled it Home, After the Storm, and it became the center of their new living room, proof that healing could be beautiful. Months later, Eloise stared at a test in her hand, mouth open in shock. When she told Declan, he froze, then dropped to his knees and kissed her belly. "I didn't think I could feel this full," she said, "but somehow, life keeps giving." Declan teared up. "You gave life back to me, too." That night, they lay in silence, one hand on her stomach, the other over each other's hearts. The baby wasn't just a surprise, it was a symbol, a promise, a beginning that came after every ending. Eloise began writing a letter to the baby growing inside her. "You were born from ashes," she wrote, "from grief turned into grace, from love that had every reason to walk away but never did." Declan read over her shoulder and couldn't speak for minutes. "They'll know everything," she said, "the pain, the love, the miracle that brought them here." He kissed her hand. "And they'll never have to question what love looks like, because they'll see it every day in us." On the anniversary of Simon's death, Eloise lit a candle in the garden and placed the compass necklace beneath a tree at Ivy Hill. She didn't cry, not in sorrow, but in peace. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, "for loving me first, but I'm ready to live fully now." Declan stood beside her, holding her other hand, and as the candle flickered out, she smiled. "This isn't the end of remembering, it's just the end of carrying it alone." And the stars above them felt like approval, not as a gift. Declan compiled all their video diaries, letters, and photos into a short film titled She Stayed. He premiered it just for her, in their garden, under string lights. The final scene showed Eloise laughing, twirling barefoot on the beach. "This is who you are," Declan whispered. "Not a widow, not a scarred woman, but the most radiant human I've ever known." Eloise wept softly as the credits rolled, where one line read, "Thank you for choosing me even when you were still healing." Together, they recorded one last video. "This is our last chapter for now," Declan said, "but we hope our journey gave you more than just a story." Eloise looked into the camera and smiled. "If you're still healing, don't wait to be perfect, to love or be loved." They thanked everyone, encouraged likes, shares, and subscriptions, and reminded the audience that love doesn't erase pain, it makes room for it. "And in that room," she said, "you'll find peace." On a warm morning at Ivy Hill, Eloise woke in Declan's arms, their newborn son sleeping between them. Birds chirped outside. The sun spilled across the white sheets. She brushed Declan's cheek, whispering, "You gave me the fairy tale, but it was the truth that saved me." He kissed her softly. "The truth is, I'd marry you 1,000 times more. Broken, healing, whole, always." And with that, they closed their eyes again, no longer afraid of storms, because they had become each other's shelter.